welcome. Welcome to tonight's meeting. We are recording this meeting so that we can post it on our website, and people who can't make it can watch it and participate in that way. This is assuming we're going in the right direction, this is our third and final community meeting for the design of Ryan Playground in Charlestown. My name is Bea Chatfield. I'm the project manager, and I'm here with Weston Sampson and our outreach coordinator from Parks, Christine Brandeo. And thank you for attending and welcome. Let's go on to the next slide. Here's some Zoom tips. During the presentation, we're going to ask that you keep your questions to yourself. You can either type them in the chat and we can answer them as we go if they're easy, sort of one-off answers, sort of technical questions. Otherwise, we will save them for the last portion of the meeting when we have it more open format, kind of a conversation. So just if you could hold on to your questions till the end, that's great. We can have the conversation then. Next slide. Our agenda for tonight, we're going to do sort of general introductions and sort of overview right now, and then we're going to go into what we heard at meeting 2 and the following survey, sort of all of the data that we're working with, the existing conditions and the climate resiliency, which is one of the major reasons why we are doing our project. The preferred site plan, this is the moment everyone's been waiting for, to see the design that our consultants have pulled together based on all of the input, preferences, data, information that we have. And then we are eager to hear what you guys think of that in our listening and discussion section. And then we will share closing remarks and next steps. Could go on to the next slide. So here's our project team. Like I said, I am Bea Chatfield. I'm the project manager. There's my contact information right there, abigail.chatfield@boston.gov, and my direct phone number. So if you have any questions or want to make any comments during the meeting, after the meeting, just that's my information. Please give me all your thoughts. We've got Brandon Kunkel, Farah Dickock, and Gracie Villa here, all from Weston Sampson. This is our very talented design team, and we're thrilled that they can come walk us through what they've been doing design-wise. And then we also have Christine Brandeo, who is the controls of tonight's meeting. And so she is our outreach coordinator, and this is her contact info. So next slide. Here's our project schedule. We had our first community meeting back in September. And then we proceeded coordinating with the sort of Sullivan Square design group. That was a meeting with Hood Green and the Rutherford Avenue project and Ryan Playground, trying to make sure that we don't have overlaps between what we're doing, or if we do have overlaps with our programs, that they complement each other and not just mindless replication. Then in December, we had our second community meeting, very helpful. We got a lot of good direction there. And here we are at our third meeting, which is where we're showing our proposed schematic design. Assuming we are good to go and that we are responding to all the needs that we've heard, we're going to be using this summer, takes about 6 months to go into complete permitting processes. We're here at a coastal site, and so it's a little bit more complex than just your standard playground. So we probably don't want to break ground in like December. So we probably hold off until spring 2023, and that's when the phase 1 part of our park, which is the majority of our park, but phase 1 would begin. So next slide, please. We have our basic graphic here. This is what we attempt to do in all of our capital projects. We've got a number of priorities we're trying to balance. We've got the City of Boston priorities. We've got safety and regulatory guidelines. We have community input, which is why we're here tonight. And then we've got our own parks and recreation goals. And so all of these things come together, and we ask our designers to take all these things into consideration and then add their own design input and come up with the creation and design of our park. So next slide, please. So I'm going to pass this off to the design team. Gracie Villa, I think, is going to talk to this. And thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. So after our second community meeting, we sent out a survey just to make sure we heard from everybody And we're just going to go through some of the responses that we got from that quickly. We got a lot of the same feedback after our first meeting, so you guys are probably familiar with this. But we asked, how do people get to the park? The majority walk there, but 20% do come by car, 5% by bike, and 5% by MBTA. For those that do drive to the park, the majority prefer to park at the Schrafft's parking lot, which is right next door. And then some people park within the park or at street parking. And the 30% that selected not applicable were people who said that they primarily walked or biked there. And so that's why they selected that answer. We also asked if you have a preference between grass or synthetic turf fields. For those who have attended the meeting, you know that we've had a lot of conversations about this. And our survey told us that the majority prefer turf, but are open to grass fields for leagues that require it. A large majority also did not have a preference, or they were open to whatever would accommodate the most sports and usage. And then we asked if there was a multi-use synthetic turf field, what line should be painted onto it. As you can see, most people are excited about soccer, but there was also some interest in lacrosse or just having, temporary lines so it could be more fluid and less permanent. Going to our next slide. We asked, what is everyone interested in for active recreation beyond field sports? The majority answered that they're interested in pickleball or bocce, which are both things that we've included in our plan, so you'll see that soon. Basketball and tennis and fishing were also popular answers. There will be space for fishing in the plan, but basketball and tennis will be at other sites nearby. The majority of people are interested in nature-inspired playgrounds, and we'll see some images of that later on so we can get more input on what you guys are looking for. And then out of all the amenities, people thought that sports fields, waterfront access, and places to quietly enjoy being outside were sort of the top things that people are looking for. And so we hope that we have addressed that and look forward to hearing more from you guys today about that. And in our last meeting, we also showed 3 different concepts. And so we were interested in what everyone liked specifically about each concept and if there was anything missing from all 3 of them. So we looked through all of the sort of write-in answers that people gave us, and these were sort of the top responses for each of those individual concepts. The first being prioritizing harbor views. The second was adding new trees to the site. And the third was adding new activities like pickleball or bocce. And then in terms of if there was anything that they didn't see across all 3 of those concepts, we heard that people were interested in a noise barrier from Alfred Street, and then more space for other activities besides athletics, like gathering or places to walk your dog. And I will hand it back over to Brandon to talk about existing conditions and climate resiliency.
Great. Thank you, Gracie. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us this evening. It's really great to be back in front of you. I guess I get the best task in my mind of presenting the preferred plan. And I hope it generates some good conversation and discussions tonight and really puts the confidence in you folks that we've heard what you have been saying the last couple of meetings, and that we can hit the ground running coming out of this meeting. And as B mentioned earlier, when we get to the end of the presentations, we'll talk about next steps and where we move on from here. So before we get there, just real quick, just as a quick refresher, I'm going to walk through some existing conditions. I know we're all very familiar with the park, but if you are new to the public meetings tonight. Thank you for joining, but just real quick. So we're all familiar with the existing Ryan Playground as it sits today in its current position and shape. And just noting that the future proposed extension, while that is not a definitively done deal, but all things are pointing in that direction. So those are ultimately the proposed extension will become part of Ryan, and that's part of the phasing that B mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Next slide. A quick refresher on one of the driving goals of this project and the city's thinking and foresight on climate resilience and really being a leader across the nation, really on combating climate change and sea level rise. As we're aware, this particular part of Charlestown is been identified as a susceptible flood pathway moving into the future. And this is really the city's goal of using Ryan and leveraging that up against the waterfront to help combat future flooding and sea level rise. Next slide. So here is what you'll see tonight, just for some reference. Essentially at the water's edge, we'll be building a flood barrier to prevent the park from flooding. And really, it's not just the park itself. It's just another piece along the waterfront edge of combating the flood pathways. And we are noting the adjacent property at 425 Medford Street, or the Flatley project. They too have also committed to combating climate change and flooding. So we have been in very close contacts with that design team. And we're working hand in hand with them to make sure that at the end, between their project and Ryan, the two parks meet seamlessly and meet the city's goals. Next slide. So here we are, the preferred site plan. Next slide. And as I mentioned, the phasing. So phase one, as B mentioned earlier, is going to be, the goal is to do the park limits as they are today. So you won't really be sacrificing anything when it comes to land at the moment. And ultimately, once Sullivan Square comes to a completion, and just noting that they're starting at the other side of Sullivan Square and moving towards Everett as they progress through their project. So they're projecting plus or minus 2027 right now. So we do have a few years between phase one and phase two potentially. Next slide. So phase one, and Gracie, I'm going to ask if you could, just given the size and the notes and complexity, as I work through this, if you can use your mouse to assist, since I no longer have the ability to use the little red laser pointer. So let's start at the waterfront, because that's the most exciting part in my mind, and one of the critical pieces, as I mentioned. So we're going to be elevating the park approximately 6 feet from its current elevation along the water today, but really increasing the amenities along the water. There will be the harbor walk that you see today, and it's in a deck plank platform today. But as we look to the future and what this ultimately becomes, it would probably be a harder paved surface potentially, but noting that there will be areas where we want to mix up the materials and provide some more natural materials, whether or not it's wood planking or some other softer material that's perhaps either not asphalt or concrete along the water's edge. But there will also be elevational changes so that you can get closer to the water. So if we start down at the Flatley side, Gracie, and you will be entering the park from Flatley at elevation 22. So you'll be coming up about 6 feet, but then you'll have the opportunity to transition and go down a slight ramp system or stairs. There will be both there that will bring you down to a lower viewing platform that sits pretty much where the existing boardwalk is today. So there'd be about a 4-foot grade change there. And then, so as you move along from the Flatley side up, back up the stairs along the harbor walk or river walk, because we are at the Mystic River at this point, that there'll be a lot of trees along the water now, opportunities to have seating under the trees. There'll probably be cafe tables, sitting tables along the harbor walk or river walk. And then there will be a series of embankment seating for the sports fields so that it feels more like a stadium versus at grade or at level bleachers. There will be accessible ramps to come on and off of the Riverwalk to make that transition from the athletic field elevation up to the Riverwalk elevation. So as you move along, then you'll come to a playground area. So we'll be moving the playground from where it is currently to the water's edge. We thought this was a really great opportunity to really engage that portion with a lot of activity and excitement along the water. And what's better to do that than kids? It also provides parents the opportunity to be able to multitask and be able to view some of the sports fields if they have multiple kids with them. So they'll be able to engage the playground as well as the fields at the same time. And then ultimately you move beyond the playground as you come towards Alfred Street, and there would be again another elevated overlook area where you can sit down, have a cup of coffee or meet someone. And really it's about looking back towards the city. You'll see the Tobin Bridge in the background. And then it's also too serving as a screen of the existing Eversource building that they have. We've been in a lot of conversations with Eversource specific to their easements and utilities that run through Ryan. And unfortunately, there's really no good answer or cost-effective answer for addressing that building. That building has to pretty much stay where it is today at the elevation. So we aren't able to actually put a deck over the building. They need to have open air access to it. They also need to be able to get a vehicle in there to service and maintain the power that comes into that building. And I'm sure you folks are all aware, just much more than we are. This service that's coming across underneath the Mystic River is serving all of Charlestown, and that's why it's a big deal to attempt to move it. They would have to cut the power, so folks would be out of power for periods of time. Not that that's impossible, but from a financial perspective, it makes it really, really challenging. So we're going to do everything we can to mitigate the views of that and screen it through plantings and trees. But the idea is that you're actually sitting above it, and so you'll look over it and you won't really hopefully observe it because of the tree plantings that are there. But what it does actually, it also offers the opportunity to have storage for you folks back in that corner. It won't be so visible or prevalent, so it could be tucked back. It becomes more of a storage area for you folks, because we are aware that square footage is precious at this site, and you know the programs that you all support require equipment. So we totally understand that. We just wanted to provide you an opportunity to be able to keep that equipment on site. So what we're representing there are 2 storage trailers similar to what you have now, the Connex storage boxes, full size, 8 by 40. And there's a few other opportunities that we'll walk through that also will provide additional storage throughout the site. So that's the water's edge. And now we'll move along Alfred Street, Gracie, and work through the fields area. So you'll see we'll call it the brighter shade of green. That's representing a synthetic turf multi-use field. and that overlays a youth baseball field, a softball field, and a full-size soccer field. It can be continued to be broken down for a U6 soccer field or other sports. We were just showing these as reference, as these were the key sports that were identified in the feedback. There would be a natural grass Little League field along the water's edge there. And once again, you have the built-in seating or embankment seating so that you're looking down onto the field. A little bit different experience than being at field level, more of a stadium effect, and just a different perspective that we find to be interesting. Each of the dugouts will have shade canopies for protection from the sun, which is great. And these will all have state-of-the-art LED sports lights that are very efficient, very effective on their cutoffs, completely dark sky compliant, modern day technology, easily programmable. It can all be done from a phone now. We do have the ability to provide pickleball courts. We thought that was a nice amenity to add to Ryan. It's not there currently. So those would be nestled in between the fields. And then you'll have a natural grass Little League field, much like you have today. It'll have the batting cage, bullpen area, dugouts, a press box with storage below it. And then that field will also be lit up as well. And just noting, and it's hard to see just because it's on a computer screen and the scale, there would be park benches throughout the site, underneath the trees, along the walkways. Each one of the walkways, just for service and maintenance of the site overall, would be 10 feet wide on average. There's a couple that are a little bit narrower at 6 feet, but the idea is to be able to provide a higher level of service and maintenance without damaging the fields. So emergency vehicles, park maintenance vehicles that have to get in, and empty trash cans, pick up broken tree limbs, just a better all-around level of maintenance. The existing building that's out there today is going to be remain as is and will remain part of the program. We thought there was an opportunity to provide a screened fence or some sort of screening on the backside or the street side, and another opportunity for some more storage. You will note the parking has gone away, and this goes to the feedback that we heard in meeting number 2, where majority of the users are walking, and then the balance of the users, about majority of the balance of the users are parking at the Shafts City Center. So there will still be a few parking spaces for accessibility and service vehicles, emergency vehicles, to be able to provide that access. But the idea is that let's leverage that area now that's there currently and provide some more amenities for you folks in a way that's more meaningful and thoughtful. Especially if, so we have had conversations with Flatley, and it really comes down to getting the word out, and their parking lot is completely usable by the public. As we're all aware, they're working through their own plans and projects now, but we have had preliminary conversations, and they remain committed to the community and providing parking on their parking lot. So we thought that was a phenomenal opportunity to provide additional park space versus parking lot space. So you'll see every one of the fields now has a formal dugout with a shade canopy, which isn't there currently, but definitely an overall victory in my mind. Just provide a higher level of service and health and safety from the sun during those hot summer days. And the idea, particularly, you kind of start to see a core service area coming off of that parking lot. We are going to relocate the existing street hockey roller rink to better, and really what that allows us to do is to move the natural turf field at a location that is oriented for optimal sun orientation, and nestle that closer to the support building that's there today, as well as the press box area. So you start to get this core of services and areas where there's gathering spaces. The facilities are closer in proximity to some of the key elements. And then along Alfred Street, there would be some temporary screen vegetation to where phase 2 will ultimately pick up. There's been some conversations and comments that B has had. If we're going to move the roller rink, can we provide a buffer along Alfred Street so that it doesn't feel like the cars are just rolling on by. It's intended to be temporary, and what we'll talk about that in a minute. What does a temporary screen wall really look like? We thought this was really an opportunity to bring, if Parks is going to go through this effort of really refurbishing this park and bringing it to a much higher level of service, why not be proud of that and bring some excitement to it? So there's an opportunity here where you can really make an announcement to the folks that are going over to Everett and Somerville, and this is such a key location and sort of a gateway into Charlestown. So we'll talk about that in just a minute as we work through some of these precedent images. So why don't we go to the next slide, Gracie, then. So phase 2 in approximately the year 2027, as Sullivan Square gets completed, this portion of land will become available to Boston Parks. And that's when we'll be adding bocce courts, more formal gateway or pedestrian entrance off of Sullivan Square. Coming off of that, a more prominent shade structure to really make a nice, creative, strong statement at the entrance to the park, with an entry plaza at the front. There's opportunities for a nice sign wall along Sullivan Square, a more passive lawn area, a quieter lawn area further away from the active recreation fields. And then where we had a temporary screen wall in phase 1, it would ultimately become a seat wall for the bocce courts and the rink, and sort of link those two together. You have two side-by-side spaces with seating in between. And then the screen storage space at the back of the building, just for reference. And that would be part of the phase 1 and not phase 2. So that's the phase 2. And as I mentioned, that's approximately 5 years away. But the idea is that as phase 1 is coming online, that it's fully functional, it's able to operate, using the existing curbway alignments. You're not giving up anything that you don't have already, and anything that is in phase 2 are future amenities that would align with the current program that would be added in phase 1. Next slide. So here's a summary, and if you can read the text, that's great. My eyes are going, so I'll try my best, but here's some of the quick takeaways in our mind. The extensive addition of tree canopy, great views of the Mystic, and then additional gathering spaces throughout the park, little nodes, little areas where opportunities for more tables and benches underneath trees, more of a park-like setting. The amenities would include, and some of the stuff is in phase 2, but game tables, bocce courts, the hockey rink, the playing fields, the multi-purpose field, playground, splash pad, batting cages, pickleball courts, storage, the harbor walk / river walk, adult fitness, and fishing. And that's a great reminder on the adult fitness. They're hard to see, but there are, I think there's 4 or 5 areas where there would be fitness equipment throughout the park. So you could literally do a workout circuit using the pathways, jogging along the water. And the idea is to really provide as much amenities and multi-generational pieces to really encourage people to come along, see this great park, use this great park, and really capitalize on this opportunity that Boston Parks is providing. Some of the waterfront experiences would obviously be the views. It will be a combination of hard edges and soft edges, and we'll explain that a little bit more in the next slide or two related to the hard edge and soft edge. There will be a cantilevered river walk along the red dash line. And just to note, that red dash line represents the climate resilient edge. Anything on the back side of that would be protected. Anything on the water side of that would be designed in a way that it's able to be inundated with water over time as the sea rises, but it would also allow for quick recovery. It's intended to provide a softer edge immediately up against the water, some native habitat planting vegetation for animals and fowl, but also just really provide a resilient edge that will serve the city well through 2070. So just currently there's 71 trees on site. I actually found that number a little surprising, only because it doesn't feel like there's 71 trees out there because it's such a big site. We do, as part of the resilient measures and getting in all the amenities, we are going to be left with only 28 existing trees. That's a bit of a hard pill to swallow, but just noting that we are adding back 122. So we will be at 150 trees approximately. So definitely increase over the existing canopy as the park begins to grow into the future. Next slide. So as I was mentioning, it's a bit of a soft edge, hard edge, particularly up against the water. There'll be opportunities where you're closer to the water elevationally, and you'll be able to interact with that native planting buffer along the water, at least visually. And then there'll be other portions of the boardwalk where it cantilevers over and you're looking down onto the softer edges. And then in the bottom section specifically, where you're down at the lower level, you'll be looking over the existing seawall, cantilevering over the existing seawall, and looking down onto the water from there. Part of the reason is there's a major gas line. So not only do we have a major electrical corridor, we actually have a major gas line corridor that runs through the park. So working with National Grid, who owns this 24-inch gas line, they need to be able to maintain access to it in an emergency situation. So that's partially the reason for the planting. They don't want to have to go through pavement, go through retaining walls. And just, it's actually a relatively shallow pipe. It's only 3 feet deep. So in order for us to get the structural stability of the new seawall, we need to be offset of their gas line, just from settlement and pressures on that gas line. But you'll see, particularly in the top section, this is up at the Alfred Street side, where the gray box on the left, that represents the Eversource utility building. And then, as I mentioned, you'd have a elevated overlook with some planting of trees and vegetation on the utility side to help screen. But the idea is that you're able to have a really nice perspective and look down onto the water, elevated. And we'll talk about really in greater detail when we get into the precedent images of how that could really be a nice location for hanging out, meeting people, watching the games, watching the playgrounds, and of course, taking in the amazing views. The second section is through the playground area. So just noting that the play structure you see is for graphic purpose only. This is not intended to be the final play structure, but just providing that additional excitement being up against the water while being able to take in a game. If you're a parent, you're not stuck trying to juggle between the existing location of the playground and the fields where they currently are. The idea is that you're able to really capitalize on the water location as well as the field location. And then the third section, as I mentioned, is down by the Charlestown City Center side, and just another area where it is lower, better for fishing and casting a pole into the Mystic River. But you also have the raised Riverwalk area that will look down onto the fields below. You'll see there's a seat wall underneath the planting. So lots of opportunities to sit around and gather along the water's edge. And just noting that minimally the Riverwalk is 15 feet wide. So it's not a narrow sidewalk by any stretch of the imagination. So, ultimately, once the Charlestown City Center 425 Medford Street project comes forward and they've put in their resilient edges and it meets the Ryan edge, there's a continuous connection that can really increase the overall Harbor Walk system. Next slide. Lighting, as I mentioned, there would definitely be all new sports lighting, highly efficient, really able to dial in and provide the best lighting possible that's out there right now on the market, and highly usable, easily usable. But also there is some lighting along the Harbor Walk now, Riverwalk, that's intended to stay in place, as well as additional lighting throughout the park, just so it doesn't feel so dark at night. And we really want people to use the park as long as they can, and we don't want it to be limited by sunlight. So safe walking paths throughout the park, and better playing sports lighting. Next slide. So now we're going to get into some of the amenities. As I mentioned, 2 natural grass fields. We all know what those look like, but we highlighted those 2 locations in yellow. And then this is an example of a multi-use field where you can see the overlays of a soccer field and a baseball field, and how those would operate together. So just the soccer field is outside any of the pitching areas. They do make portable pitching mounds for synthetic turf fields, so it won't impede the soccer play. And it really truly is a multi-use field. Next slide. Active recreation, game tables. It could be ping pong. We're thinking of ping pong particularly. This would probably be in the phase 2 area in the plaza. Game tables, cafe tables spread throughout the park, different locations, pickleball courts, bocce courts, the fishing pier, and then, as I mentioned, the adult fitness in 3 different areas throughout the park. You can see those there highlighted in the yellow. Next slide. Overlook areas, as I mentioned, this is an overlook area in the seaport. This would be something similar here. This is the upper left image. So looking back down along the harbor walk just provides a totally different perspective of the water and the city skyline. There could be planters out there. This would definitely have some trees as we show, so there's definitely shade, which is good. It's just really a key spot that provides a destination within Ryan. Open passive lawn areas, particularly in phase 2. And then embankment seating, this would be something along the Little League fields or the baseball field areas, as I was mentioning, where it's more integrated into the landscape and not a cold metal bleacher. And then we would have sitting walls underneath the trees, as you can see in this image here. There's opportunities to break up the paving types and patterns to help separate, areas of gathering and plaza spaces from the walking areas. So it doesn't have to feel like a monolith of pavement. There's different techniques to help bring in textures and patterns. Next slide. In the phase 2, we're showing a shade structure. It could be something that's more open air, as you see in the upper left corner. It could also have the fabric canopies. These are just options, more for discussion this evening. But the idea is that there's this vertical element that really brings attention to the entrance to the park from Sullivan Square, but also provides an opportunity for shade sitting underneath it. And then the temporary screen walls, as I mentioned, as we wait for phase 2 to come along, but we want to provide a buffer along Alfred Street. Could it be something that's a little bit more sculptural and creative? We want it to be temporary. Wood really provides that best option, but it doesn't have to be a boring wood slat fence. There's some really creative opportunities through textures and wood types that could be utilized to really bring attention along Sullivan Square. Or, there's an opportunity to do a mural wall if that's exciting. And, you can see sort of in the second photo, this is in Roxbury. It could easily say Ryan Playground or Charlestown. We felt like there was a good opportunity with the revitalization of Sullivan Square to really make a nice statement for the park and Charlestown as a whole. Next slide. Benches of all different types. We want to make sure we provide a variety. They could be, natural materials, more of the classic Boston, New England park benches, or more natural materials, and whether or not they're granite blocks, as you see in the upper left. But the idea is to have a variety of seating types, and whether or not they're formal seats, as you see in the lower right, but more of, granite blocks that you could sit on. We want to provide a bunch of opportunities in all different types of seating throughout the park. As I mentioned, cafe tables and chairs spread throughout the park, along the water, next to fields, underneath the trees, ADA accessible picnic tables, cafe tables, etc. Next slide. So playgrounds. So some of the feedback from meeting 2 and meeting 1, the natural themes were heard loud and clear. We do want to say, like, we're anticipating that it's a mixture. I think the contemporary came in relatively close. We think the main structures will probably be closer to the contemporary. The reason for that is if park has to do a maintenance regime, the traditional metal rope style structures that you see up in the right tend to lend themselves for more durability, more use than some of the more natural play pieces. But that we think it's going to be a combination, provides the interest, provides options for the kids to play on. But it could be a mix. It doesn't have to be all one or the other. So more of like the balancing logs or stepping logs, or could be even a climbing wall where it's made out of natural materials to complement the main structures. a 5 to 12 structure, a 2 to 5 structure. We also want to engage the kids in their senses. There could be musical type instruments, which you see here in the middle row on the right-hand side. We want to leverage the fact that we have a grade change naturally from the Harbor Walk at elevation 22 down to the field entrances at 16, building in some embankment slides, leveraging the hill change, and it's a little hard to see in the lower left-hand side, but there's a main tower at the lower level and you enter in at the upper level. So there's a lot of opportunities to really capitalize on that grade change along the water. And then we thought it would be really unique and exciting that, if we're putting the playground up against the water, we should definitely put the splash pad with it up against the water, but really integrating it thoughtfully along the harbor edge, surrounding it with a lot of trees, separating it from the playground, but yet it's still visible for parents to be able to navigate multiple children. But this is just an image of a splash pad being nestled in within tree area. So it doesn't have to be just a flat surface. It could be used natural materials underneath trees, and really thoughtfully done so that it feels part of the landscape. Next slide. Colors, patterns, could be really bright, engaging colors. The bright colors tend to engage kids more, but from if we're going to lean more towards natural materials, you can go more towards the neutral tones. And just because we're using natural materials doesn't mean the aesthetics of the equipment has to be less exciting. Here's an example, and we've talked to this manufacturer. We're actually considering similar pieces for Ryan, where the towers are made out of a wood slat on traditional steel posts. So like I said, it could be a mix and match of materials. It doesn't have to be all or the other. And then just some of the more traditional equipment with steppers and universally accessible transition ramps, things like that. So next slide. And I guess that is the last slide. So really exciting. Thank you. We're looking forward to hearing questions and comments as we move forward. I'm going to hand it back to Bea.
Thank you guys. That was a great presentation going through all of the details, and there was some lively chat that was going on during the presentation, and I think there was some real interest in seeing that north-south connection maintained. So we had shown in our second meeting the option to continue the Riverwalk connection along through to Alford Street. And the challenge that we've run into, and this is not to say that it absolutely 100% can't happen, but all of the infrastructure of Eversource makes that very difficult. The thing that we didn't want to have happen, I guess, was that we didn't want to have one long walkway connection that then is essentially like a dead end. We wanted to have space that it would connect to in like the deck area, so that you wouldn't be walking down this long pathway and then end up at a fence and then have to turn around and come back before that connector across Alford Street is established. And so when Eversource came back to us and said that they aren't allowing the idea of decking over the surface of their structure, we really sort of were like, okay, well, we're not really sure what we're going to do about this. So I don't know if Amber or Alice or Dan, you want to go into further detail. We can talk about different design ideas for that. I think let's go with Dan, because I think you were the first one to comment on that in the chat.
Yeah, I've had a long thought on this. It's a difficult problem for sure. You also have the gas line there too. The only thing that makes physical sense within the boundaries that you have is either going into the river itself and going underneath the bridge in what is called a submarine tunnel. So it's not exposed to the air except for the two ends, and those ends were above the water line. The other option is, and I thought it was kind of fascinating when I saw it, is, and it's used in railroads, is it's a horizontal, vertical elevator mechanism that actually you go into like an elevator, and then it goes up, and then it goes across, and then back down again, which I thought was fantastic. But they're not cheap. On top of it, there's a maintenance issue associated with them. So I don't think that's practical. The other thing would be, it might be possible, but then you have to deal with the land acquiring from the MBTA in their parking lot space on the side is under the roadway on the land side, not under the bridge side, but on the land side, have a trench style tunnel underneath the road. But that means you have to have space on the other side. You have space on your side, but not on the other. And I don't know all the structural elements under the ground, but I believe that's possible.
So those are good thoughts. I think none of the actual crossing would be in Parks project. And then not just talking about Ryan Playground, but because it is over the street, we presume that that would be a BTD, or, that would be one of their projects. But, we were looking at the different options, and we recognize the physical reality of, like, yes, you could go under the bridge. But the condition there, it's like, you don't really want to go underneath stuff these days when your project is to try and build up. Just, we don't want things to flood. We're also considering the sort of.
I'm not saying that it has a connotation. There's truth to that, but I don't think that's going to be a real issue, because just like if you have a pipe that's shaped in a U, and as long as the ends of the U are above the threat of flood, are you going to have water in the U pipe? No. So it's just a matter of the construct there has to be considered. And I realize that this is not a parks issue. It's not the MBTA's issue, and it's not the traffic department's issue. It's no one's and yet everyone's, because we got to get people across somehow, and we're not going to have a turkey run on the street. That's ridiculous. It's too dangerous for bicyclists, especially ones that are going to be transitioning through here, taking the North Strand pathway. So these are going to be bicyclists with trailers. So they're not going to be able to sit on a 4-foot island. It's not possible. And myself, I have a tandem bike. So if I take my girlfriend out, I'm going to be on a tandem bike. Again, it's a long bike. And we have the same problem over at Berry Field too, with the getting up over Chelsea Street. But let's focus on this one. We need to have better transit for the population going outwards to go into Medford, to the parks out that way, and as well as going all the way to Lexington and Concord if you want to. But as well as the commuter traffic that's coming across from Everett, as well as Medford and Somerville, coming into Boston, as well as into the Navy Yard. We have a lot of people that actually commute to work in the Navy Yard by bike from Medford. So those are the things we're going to consider.
We had an initial meeting with Public Works to discuss this. And I imagine there are going to be more, because we recognize that this is a critical point of interest, regionally as well. And I think that the question for now for our design for this meeting is sort of what should we be doing in order to get ready for that connection to happen, and is that like, I think we need to sort of continue working on the design in that corner. Hopefully we can get a little bit of flexibility from Eversource. You know, we're going to keep meeting with them and keep trying all the, if we have any leverage, I don't know. If anyone knows, if anyone has a good contact there, let me know.
Do the best you can. That's all that we can ask. That's all we can ask, is the best you can.
For sure. Yeah.
And just work it out as, you know, we have to maybe have a meeting specifically with to talk about this in all the people that are involved. Maybe that would be a good idea, so that we're not pushing you into a bad space, nor you know, get all the players on the you know, around the table. It's really what it comes down to. And I'm open to talk. Well, others want to talk. So
Dan, just real quickly before we move on, and Gracie, if you don't mind, I believe Alice asked the question if we could show where the possibility of a future connection is on Alfred Street. And just noting that while B has had a very preliminary conversation, and that MBTA with their new bike path has said, hey, we should definitely have a connection to Ryan. That's the right thing to do. You know, there's no funding in place, but there's the idea that there would be a connection. The challenge is, and maybe the MBTA has more pull with Eversource, but Gracie, if you're able to sort of hover your mouse over where the future touchdown of a bridge would be, based on B's conversation, you'll see it's exactly where the Eversource building is, and that makes that piece very challenging. However, as I noted, you know, bridging a major street like Alfred Street is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. Requires a lot of agreements between state, city, and Eversource. But long story short, that's been identified as the future connection to continue the Harbor Walk over into Somerville and along the MBTA property there.
Brandon, River
Walk. I'm sorry, Dan, you are right. I'm sorry. We've been having that conversation throughout this entire process. I understand it's definitely a river. I just default back to the overall Harbor Walk program, and therefore I call it a harbor. I apologize.
It's okay. I live with it. I'll live with it.
All right. I hope you can take pity on me.
Okay, so I think Joanne, if Joanne had her hand up, I think first thing. So
Yeah.
Joanne, you want to go?
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much. Packed in quite a lot into this plan, so I'm pretty impressed with that. But I am concerned about a few things. One is the building, the existing building. Is it going to be renovated or anything, or is it just? I mean, I can't imagine it's in the kind of shape. I haven't been there, so I'm asking the question.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in bad shape, and we recognize that. And we have put in a funding request for PFD to address that. And that was submitted in the most recent round of budget requests. And we are expecting that we'll get some sort of funding for it. We've done an initial assessment as part of our project. So I think that would be something that would, you know, smooth the process for them to get their project started to address it. I don't know what, you know, because we've just requested funding for that. I don't know how that works as far as their time frame. But it will be addressed. That's like, you know, we've requested funding for that. So that process has started. But I don't know if we can promise that like it's going to happen on the same time frame as our park. So.
All right. That was good to know that it's already, the request has been put in. So I guess however we could help. The parking, I know that the people who have responded to your survey say that they bike or walk. I don't know if you're getting a lot of people with young children saying that they're biking and walking there. So I understand why you would only put a few spots there, and depending on the private landowner next door who has always allowed parking there, but they're only required as part of their agreement with the DEP to have, I don't know, a small number relatively. So what I think that, because you never know what's going to happen in the future, you never know about properties changing hands. And if that is how we're expecting people to be able to park, I think that you need to get something more solid than them being a good neighbor. I think there has to be something in some kind of contractual agreement that says that they, in perpetuity, they will allow that. I maybe that's impossible, but I think that we need to, and you need to try to do that, because to say that people who, the games may be with other teams from other places. I mean, it's just, you know, we're boxing ourselves in here. I'm not saying to turn this into a commuter park in terms of a lot of cars, but I'm just a little nervous about this, that we're only providing half a dozen spots here.
I totally hear you on that. And I think that, you know, there are two things here. One, you know, we have Parks Department does provide commentary on the permit that they are submitting for 425 Medford. And so my understanding is that the agreement for parking will be solidified. I'm not sure the quantity necessarily, but we did receive verbal, you know, confirmation that those, you know, Flatley does intend to provide parking, and they're,
I understand, but they're right now,
they're
but they're looking for approval. And if I'm just saying it's a vulnerable situation that the community is in, because if the city is not complete, you know, isn't thrilled with their project, it's just become a bargaining chip. So I'm just going to leave that as an issue that needs to get resolved in a more permanent way. And the last is about the trees. I'm sorry, the gentleman that just spoke, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. No. Brian, is that?
Brandon,
I apologize, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
When you said that the 71 trees, you didn't realize that there were that many given the space. I think that's what 150 trees is going to look like, not much better than that. So I feel like we're creating a beautiful park that, as the heat island that we are as Charlestown gets hotter, that we have all this place to play, but if it's going to be so too hot to be there, this is the future. And I don't feel like we have providing enough trees. And the fact that we're cutting down so many of them, mature trees, it makes me very nervous. So I just say, try to get more trees in there, save more if you can, that make a commitment to not put, you know, twigs there with the, you know, that the caliper is enough that to be a real tree in real time without being at risk for dying because it's too big. But I'm just worried that 150 trees is still not going to look like there's shade here, except for isolated places. So I'm not happy with that. I understand everything's a compromise here. You can only pack so many things in and save trees that are either there now or plant them if you have something else already planned for it. But I just think there are not enough trees for this big of a space. And that's all I have right now, but I just hope there's a way to reconsider that.
All right.
Thank you.
Joanne. That's 100% great point. I appreciate that perspective, especially as a landscape architect.
I think also someone had, I think it was either Alice had asked, or maybe it was Amber had asked, how many of the new trees are proposed for phase one? I'm not sure, Gracie, do you have any breakdowns? You do? Okay, so if you could share that information.
Yeah, so if we were to go, say 150 trees is the number of trees that we go forward with, there are about 90 trees that will be included in phase 1. And then the rest would go in phase 2 to fill out that those spaces that are added in the proposed extension.
Okay, and so I think Amber and Alice, in that order, you guys have your hands up.
Hello. I'm doing some multitasking with a toddler here, so thank you for your forgiveness. I was just going to chime in on the discussion around the crossing in Alford Street. I don't think a short-term crossing is really tenable. I think it's just how does this fit in with a long-term Rutherford Ave crossing? And last time I remember seeing the plans, the crossing wasn't like right at where the Eversource building was. I thought it was like slightly further away from the water, but my question was really just like, where is the design for Rutherford and is there a crossing there? And is this taking it into account? Not, is this leading the crossing discussion? That makes sense. So.
Or I guess if you want to respond, or so long story short, we've been in touch with BTD. We're aware of, they're at 25% level. They're working through their time frame and design. I think their initial, because as I mentioned, they're starting at the other end of their project. This will be the last component of it in 2027. And they're raising Alford Street, at least in their existing or current condition, approximately 3 feet up above its existing grade now. So we'll be, taking into those future grades. That's part of what you see on the plan. There's essentially a wall that will surround that Eversource building. Part of that is ultimately going to be holding the grades for Alford Street for their future connection. And then, we don't know exactly where they'll end up, but that's what we're aware of at the moment.
Dan saying that Alford and Main are not being raised.
So Alford is going to transition from the overpass or the bridge to Everett. That's going to get raised up, and then as it heads back towards Sullivan Square, it transitions back to the existing grade.
So I think, Amber, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but our idea in our park design was to provide sort of area where we could either land a ramp or the sort of general zone that would provide the sort of connector in the future. And that was the area, I think, that much of it overlaps. Previously, we've been looking at the building and sort of aware that that might be an issue, but we weren't fully cognizant of all of the manholes that surround the building, which are also these apparently untouchable structures. And so they are really right there in the corner. And I think that, I'm of two minds. Like if we don't provide a connector right now, we have our deck that we're showing and we have like a retaining wall that would be sort of screening off the building, then it's possible in the future when that crossing is created, we could ramp down potentially to the deck. Have sort of like a mini capital project, part of phase 2, I guess, right? It would be like 2 little chunks of phase 2, which might be better than having like a weird dead end pathway for the 4 years that we're waiting for the grade to change on Alford Street. Also with a question mark of like, and it might be an overhead thing that now we have this dead end pathway that doesn't really get us what we need. I don't know. It's
Sorry. but it sounds like you're coordinating with BTD and, you know, that's just
Trying.
trying.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, you know, there's never like a great time, like everything's coordinated, let's go have the public meeting. You know, it's like, okay, there's so many moving parts and there's so many projects in this area that, like, if we waited to share these designs, I feel like we'd never go anywhere. But I think that this is obviously a really critical part of the project that people feel really strongly about, myself included. So, you know, I think that it's something that we would provide like an update on our project webpage and sort of say like, here's the connector, this is what we're thinking. Or, you know, if it comes back and it's like, oh my God, there's all these other reasons that we just run into that we just can't do it. You know, we would also share that frustrating information if that happens. I don't foresee that, but just to be totally transparent, like we'll share our progress as it happens. So for what that's worth.
That's a good enough answer for now. I mean,
Okay.
just try to get more people to be thinking about it.
Yeah.
I appreciate your work on this. I know it's a challenging site for many reasons.
It's exciting, but yes, challenging. So. All right, Alice, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thanks, Bea, and thanks, Brandon. I think I have the shortest of questions about this crossing of Alfred Street Bridge, and then other questions about the waterfront. I guess one possibility to, I think I agree with Amber, it's probably like just creating a great long-term solution is probably it. But I do wonder, it's not clear, you know, will the final Alfred Street Bridge, or Alfred Street, I guess, and the edge of the park be at the same elevation along the whole length of it? Or will at some places there be sort of a elevation mismatch? Because it's possible that the real connection spot is closer to like the MBT, or like a driveway near, like south of the MBTA yard, right? Like, could that be a place with the signalized intersection for pedestrians and bikes that's sort of midway? Like, I would obviously love to stay on the water, but like, is there an alternative where you're not going all the way back to Sullivan Square to connect, but you have a really safe, protected crossing there? And I think that'll just be a matter of like how those two alignments work, right? If the park is lower than the road or vice versa, it'll never happen at this other place. So just sort of keeping that in mind as the final designs get worked out with BTD, everyone's favorite collaborator. I can safely say as a former employee. So that's just an observation. The question I have is about the shoreline solutions that you guys have proposed. And it wasn't clear to me, A, if you're moving the seawall or rebuilding the seawall, if the seawall is just like, it's the same seawall. And then the plantings you described, I guess in detail, Brandon, are they serving an actual like adaptation resilience purpose, or it's just like those plants can get wet and it'll be fine when the floodwaters recede?
Sure, great question. So we are moving, the existing seawall is going to remain in place. And several reasons for that is cost and time. As soon as we really touch that seawall, it becomes incrementally more expensive, because now I'm doing work within the water and ocean. And also permitting is twice as long, because I now have to go through several other permitting agencies and the ones we already have to go through, which are still quite extensive because we're working so close to the water. So, and then another caveat is that infamous gas line. You know, anything can happen with no budget, or any, you know, I can throw lots of money at it, but we want to be economically minded for the city. And shutting down a 24-inch gas line that serves Charlestown and beyond is a major undertaking, similar to the Eversource utility. So they would prefer not to touch that gas line either. So they both Eversource and National Grid have our current thinking and plans. They're going through it with their own engineers and their own perspective, and we'll be reporting back from their side as to where we think we are. We had a really good call with National Grid, the gas company. And, you know, just working through it, they seem very much on board with the current plans that we're showing. So we hope that remains the case. Really, their only caveat is if we need to get to that gas line in a quick instant, we don't want to be really having to do major excavation from a wall or pavement. They want to be able to just basically put a bucket in the ground and start digging. And I have to imagine that's probably the best philosophy, given that it's a 24-inch gas line. So, so there's that. And then related to the planting, it's definitely intended to get inundated. And I don't know if I want to call it a living shoreline, because it's going to really be elevated above the water currently. Now, as sea level continues to rise and becomes more and more inundated, maybe that does become more of a living shoreline as time progresses. But right now it's intended more to provide just habitat along the water's edge for birds and you know, other critters.
And are there places where the people can interact with it, or it's just like you're above it and you can see that it's the landscape down there?
Sure. So in areas where we're able to bump the seawall back further, we're able to slope up and get closer to the 22 elevation with natural planting. So you'll be interacting at that height. Gracie, if you're able to pull those
So
sections back
the
up.
planting is sloped,
Correct.
not tiered.
Correct.
Thank
Well,
you.
it depends where we're
It
at.
varies.
It does vary. And then your better connection is at that overlook on the Shraff City Center side. You'll be at grade with the planting there.
Okay. I was trying to decode where the cross sections happen, so that's helpful.
Nope, fair enough. I totally get it.
Oh, perfect.
I mean,
Okay, A, B, and C. Perfect.
There you go.
As far as your opinion, Alice, on like, I mean, I think it's great for people to interact with plantings, but I also know that it's not awesome for plantings to have people interact with them, you know? So like, do you have like a recommended approach for shoreline plantings? Like keep people away, or like try and have these experiences integrated?
I think you guys might be planting the first like native salt tolerant species in a place where people might touch them. Like in Boston, like there's not a lot of precedent for this. There's salt tolerant plantings in Martins Park, but not so many that people are like, ooh, what's this? And I guess the other question is having some kind of protection so that people aren't walking through them to try to get to the water, which I'm guessing is what that very thin line is in the first diagram.
I think that's a flood elevation. Wait, yeah, that's a flood elevation marker.
No,
Or
the vertical line.
Oh,
Yes.
that's a handrail.
Yeah. So I think in that world, I think the plants, it's great that they're there. I think if you guys take the time to bring in salt tolerant species, and that's a specific part of your design or native species, then you want to speak to that. I think it's a great opportunity for interpretive signage, which the Friends of the Boston Harbor Walk might be really interested in helping you with. They usually do more history stuff, but I think if you said, you know, this is the thing we want to talk about here, they would be a great partner for that. And I think it's just a great opportunity to tell people like what this is and isn't.
Nice. Thank you for that, Alice.
Yep.
Okay.
Dan.
So Dan has his hand raised. If you don't mind for 1 sec, Dan, I'm just gonna, Tim McKenna asked the question, can you speak to the time frame again? Any changes in the last name? So the time frame, we have the idea is that we're gonna we're gonna learn to talk first, and then we're gonna start permitting this summer. We're going to start construction next spring. That is the goal, spring 2023. And it's going to take certainly, I would think, a year. I don't know, Brandon, you may have more construction experience than I do here, but we've got 9 acres that we're working on. So a year for these fields to be offline. So I think that's probably where you're coming from. And changes from the last meeting, we had 3 designs at the last meeting we were asking people to choose from, and now we've got one that's sort of an amalgam of those 3. So if you have any specific questions, raise your hand or keep typing in the chat, but let's go back to Dan. Thanks for your patience.
Actually, Alice stole my thunder. Only kidding. The plantation is being salt tolerant. I love it. Some signage, some education with it would be great, as well as some other signage for the boats that are traversing along the river would be nice, as well as for the animal life, birds specifically, would be very nice to have. And maybe even a spyglass or two, so people can see across, because you want to engage people, especially the little ones, to give them curiosity, their curiosity and out. And I think this is a great way of doing it. Might even have a telescope aiming down into the ground area to give them a higher magnification of the ground cover if there's something that's interesting down there. I don't know, but depending what you put in there. So that's all great stuff. The lighting along the shore should be what I call waist down along the rail there, along the shoreline, because you don't want to have the flood of the lights so people can't see across to the shore outside to the other shore. So that would be an important thing. I'm not against having tall lights, but higher lights so they're not. I hate these pedestal lights. They're too low, and so when you're walking along and you're being blinded and not getting the illumination, especially if it's not aiming downwards. If it's outwards, it's terrible. So Brandon's shaking his head, so he knows what I'm talking about. So that's good.
Dan. I do.
Yeah. So because lighting is important. There's no doubt about it, from safety as well. And the shoreline, getting into the fingers into the shore. I'm a little nervous about that because you're gonna have a little tot going into the water, and we don't want that. So we got to be careful about that. That we have safety in mind. Now, if you did this in the rural area, I wouldn't have a problem because kids there know what the water's about. Here, you're being city people don't know these things. There are too many drownings. I'm sorry. So that's it. But your plans look great otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, so I'm looking at the time and it's 7:27. This is sort of amazing coincidence. I feel like the last meeting that we had too, everybody, like, we'd gone through all the comments and all the hands raised and it was like 7:29. Very impressive. Kathy Reese, some positive notes here. I just want to applaud the design you created. Yay. So I think you guys gave us some great feedback tonight. I think that we're going to go through and really make sure that any trees we're taking out are 100% necessary. There are a lot of trees that are in really poor condition on the site. So that's another layer for removals, and usually that's what we really try and focus on. Changing an elevation in a site is really hard to retain trees. So there are going to be more than in our standard project, but we are absolutely going to take another look at that. And I appreciate your feedback on that, Joanne, and I'm sure many other people care about that as well. And yeah, we're gonna post the proposed plan. We're certainly going to keep working on coordination with BTD and the connector, because we support that as well. We think it's a really important thing to focus on. So keep posted, and we'll post these updates to our website. I'll email people when they go up so you guys can check. But thank you so much for coming, and we'll have a good night.
B, can I ask one more question?
Sorry, yeah.
You've done a really great job of letting us know when all the city processes are happening. Can you also share with this group when permitting milestones are happening as well?
Sure. Yeah.
We would love your support during the permitting process.
I know, I've never had anyone ask me for that.
I think it's not common with Parks Department projects to be also, we're in permitting now. So it would be super you've done a really great job sharing updates today.
Cool. Yeah, we can share that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you all.